of people being stuck in places, and sometimes, yeah, it does create a nightmare. I think on the reverse of that, obviously, we've had people who can't go anywhere from Hong Kong, and I think that sort of then creates issues in terms of annual leave. What do employers do in terms of that? People are like, well, I'll just carry on working. I've got nowhere to go. I might still be in the office. There's work to do. But then obviously that's not good for people's mental health, their well-being. People need a break. Is there anything that sort of firms can do to mandate that either kind of annual leave is taken at certain times, I guess when sort of workloads are less, like perhaps they were last year for a lot of businesses, or just for their own, yeah, well-being?
Yeah, that the annual leave thing is something that as the pandemic continues is starting to become an issue, because as you say, you've got you've got a situation where people are thinking, well, I can't travel, and if I'm just at home and very restricted in terms of what I can do, I don't want to be using up my my annual leave entitlement. So I think a number of companies have been looking at this, because eventually you can end up with a real logjam where a lot of people have significant amounts of accrued annual leave, and if we do suddenly come out of the restrictions and things open up again around the world, people will suddenly be wanting to exercise their newfound freedom, probably, and to take time off and to travel again and things like that. All the things that that people have been dreaming of, go and see family and so on. And it that could mean that employers have a significant challenge, because large numbers of people are wanting to do that at the same time, and there's a risk management issue there as well, because if you have a certain number of people out at a given time, managing workloads in your given sector, or needing to have particular regulated people or a certain number of people in place at a given time, all of that is going to be a challenge. So trying to find ways to get people to take annual leave. Technically, you need to look at this in terms of statutory annual leave as opposed to contractual annual leave. So statutory annual leave is the number of days which normally varies from 7 to 14 days in Hong Kong, that employees are entitled to have based on seniority. And it's an issue here because you can't force people to take statutory annual leave during the year in which that leave is accrued. What you can do is, if you're into the next annual leave year, you can give people notice, and then you can require them to take their entitlements if they haven't done already. And we're sort of moving into that territory, probably because of the length of the duration of the pandemic so far, where employers may be finding that they're into the new annual leave year, and therefore they can start, if necessary, give people notice and say you need to use some of your annual leave. But yeah, that's statutory annual leave. With contractual annual leave, which is other amounts which employers provide on top of the statutory entitlement. This really depends on what the sort of terms are that you place on that additional leave, and handbooks and policies will often have something saying that the employer can require you to use up that annual leave within a certain time, or we'll have provisions about rollover and how you handle all of that. So you need to sort of have a look at check what you actually have in place, and but it may well be possible with contractual annual leave, if you have provisions to say to people, you need to take this, and you need to start using this up, because it can't keep on being accrued.
Sure.
Difficulty is that if you provide amounts of annual leave if you're above statutory, but you haven't got those kind of provisions in place that says how as an employer you can deal with it, it will probably be treated as in accordance with the employment ordinance again, such that that it would have to follow the same system as I just described for statutory annual leave. So it's worth kind of getting on top of this and understanding what you have in place. And I think in a lot of ways, and the same goes for talking to people about working from home and a number of the other things that we'll discuss today. But there's a point at which probably you have to sort of start communicating with employees and saying, look, you know, it isn't sustainable to have people accruing vast amounts of annual leave, and emphasizing that one of the purposes of annual leave is to give people a break from working. It's to help with physical and mental wellness, and therefore encouraging people to take their annual leave and to try and keep their entitlements moving, so that you don't end up with these huge backlogs.
Sure. And actually there was quite an interesting question that was raised by somebody in advance of this seminar, because obviously the situation in Hong Kong is that there have been quite a number of people who have been put into quarantine for various reasons, because they were a close contact of somebody that had COVID, and that was the approach that's been taken. In that circumstance, can an employer say that, okay, we don't feel you can do your job properly from quarantine, you are going to have to take annual leave for that period?
Yeah, I mean, in principle, you can't force someone to take unpaid leave, because that would be a variation of contract. So in most situations where we've seen unpaid leave, it's been a situation where employers have explained to their staff that for financial reasons or other reasons, it would be helpful, particularly where businesses are on hold and not really able to operate in their particular sector, asking people to take unpaid leave in that scenario. I think if in situations where people are having to quarantine because they're coming back from somewhere, probably the big question here is around whether the person would be able to work while they're actually in the quarantine scenario. So for a lot of office-based workers, for example, you would, in principle, you would be able to keep working, just in the same way as work from home, using laptops and things like that. So in that scenario, there's it would be difficult to impose unpaid leave on someone. I think there's probably a stronger argument for being able to do that in a scenario where someone can't fulfill their role. But again, you would have to, I suppose you'd have to ask yourself the question whether, if someone's been trying very hard to get back from somewhere where they've been stuck, and then is going through quarantine and so on as a means of getting back to Hong Kong and being able to perform their role again on site, whether it's reasonable to say to them, oh, well, you should take unpaid leave while you're quarantining. That wouldn't seem like a very fair thing to do in the circumstances, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
And I was going to ask you a question, a sort of a more general question, Camilla, about annual leave, because one thing that I mean, not so much COVID related, but one thing that I've seen in terms of the contracts and things that we work on for people is the use of annual leave entitlements and higher annual leave entitlements as an incentive to candidates when looking to hire. And I was wondering whether that's something that you've seen.
Yeah, I think it's actually something that's probably changed quite a bit over the last year. I think sort of historically, a lot of the candidates that we deal with, who are predominantly lawyers, a lot of them are very money motivated. They're quite prepared to work the long hours. They've always done that. And sort of, if they're going to move, obviously a driving force is often an increase in salary. But I think as a result of people sort of over the last year having more time to themselves, perhaps workloads have been less. They have, albeit they haven't been able to travel, they have been able to have their weekends, they've had some time off. Actually, people have really started to value that a lot more. So yes, we have definitely been asked these questions. I think it's sort of, whilst people have liked having the time now, but also I think potentially they're looking forward to the future as well, in terms of thinking, okay, is sort of the landscape changing in terms of the way that we are going to travel? Are we then going to sort of think, okay, we may just take a few big blocks of holiday, rather than, I think, the lots of little breaks and get on flights all like very frequently, which I think happened a lot in Hong Kong, because there were the public holidays, and people would use those. They might trip off to Thailand or something just briefly, whereas I think people's approach is changing. So it is something that's come up a lot more, not only just in terms of annual leave, in terms of making sure, like, is there going to be flexible working? Can we work part-time? Can I do a day from home? Because people have actually quite liked it. I think in terms of having that flexibility, it wasn't something that particularly law firms sort of across the board did a lot of in the past, but I think it's really been working, and I think lawyers have found it successful. So yes, they're definitely, I think they are putting more weight on these kind of things going forward.